The Federal Reserve System virtually controls the nation's monetary system. Yet it is accountable to no one. It has no budget, it is subject to no audit, and no congressional committee knows of or can truly supervise its operations. For more than 20 years, the living standards of middle-class Americans have steadily declined. Incomes have remained flat or fallen, and the opportunities and security we once took for granted have begun to fade. For most families, one income no longer pays the bills. It requires two or more incomes to afford a home, pay medical and childcare expenses, and put children through school. Unless present trends change, young workers are unlikely to ever live as well as their parents. Good jobs with a future are harder to come by. Education doesn't count for what it once did. Taxes continue to rise, while Social Security is going bankrupt. Private pensions are no longer reliable. Economic volatility and uncertainty are on the rise. Politicians espouse numerous theories about the cause of this country's economic woes. Seldom, however, do these officials look below the surface. The roots of our economic ills can be traced to central banking and our present monetary system. The Federal Reserve claims to manage our money. Instead, it makes our money worth less and less every day. It has generated continuous and worsening business cycles and lowered our living standards.
It's really no different from a burglar in your house wanting to steal your money. That's what the Federal Reserve does. It depreciates your savings, it takes away your economic security, and it ought to be treated as an institution that does that rather than something of alleged benefit.
Money is supposed to serve as a reliable standard of economic value, not a source of instability. Until we restore sound money and take away the government's ability to debase it, we have little hope of restoring the freedom and prosperity that made America great. Great Britain's mercantilist policies deliberately tried to keep precious metals out of America, so the Spanish milled dollar became the unofficial currency. It was often divided into 8 pieces for smaller transactions, hence the term pieces of 8, with 1/4 of the coin being 2 bits. In 1792, Thomas Jefferson adopted the dollar as this country's official monetary unit.
And we went onto a gold and silver standard and started minting gold coins with the American Eagle, a $10 gold coin.
Jefferson, in particular, spoke eloquently of the dangers of paper money. During the War for Independence, the Continental Congress printed vast sums of paper money out of thin air to finance the Army. The diluted money supply naturally depreciated to almost nothing, leading to the phrase, "not worth a continental." As early as the 16th century in Europe, goldsmiths stored gold coins for their customers for a fee and issued receipts for the gold to the depositor. Thus began the use of paper as money. These receipts soon became widely accepted as a means of exchange, since it was easier and safer to use the receipts for significant transactions. This was the origin of banknotes as money substitutes. These first bankers then took this process one step further.
In effect, if the goldsmith had 1,000 ounces of gold and 1,000 ounces of legitimate receipts being held by the depositor of that gold, he could increase his profits by merely printing up another 1,000 ounces worth of receipts and lending them out. Okay. In which case you would effectively get 50% reserve banking or fractional reserve banking. Only a fraction, 50% of the receipts were now backed by gold.
There was no longer a 1-to-1 ratio of paper to gold. Now there could be 3 or 4 pieces of paper in circulation for every unit of gold in the vault. These bankers were no longer simply storing or warehousing gold for a fee. They were artificially inflating the money supply and loaning out these phony receipts at interest. This system became known as fractional reserve banking and was later transported to the early American colonies. It formed the root of American commercial banking and ultimately the Federal Reserve System.
This is a fraudulent system. It's not allowed in any other business. If you had a grain warehouse that had loaned out the grain it was supposed to have in storage, that's considered criminal. The guy'd go to jail. But the banks are the one industry that's allowed to get away with this and to profit from it.
Alexander Hamilton became the first Treasury Secretary and in 1791 set up the first Bank of the United States as America's central bank to expand the supply of paper money for the benefit of the government and the commercial banks. Thomas Jefferson opposed this view. He saw a central bank as an undemocratic tool of the northeastern banking establishment. It was dismantled after 20 years. In 1816, the federal government made another attempt to set up an inflationary central bank. But this second Bank of the United States was denounced by President Andrew Jackson as a monster bank for benefiting a few at the expense of many. Jackson succeeded in abolishing the second central bank in 1836. But by then, speculators had set up hundreds of new private banks with little or no gold to back the notes they issued. The nation's monetary system became more stable when the United States introduced a gold standard in 1834. The dollar was worth approximately 1/20th of an ounce of gold.
The gold standard was understood by the Founding Fathers, by Andrew Jackson and others, as being a money of the people. That is, it was a hard money, a money that could not be tampered with, that could not be inflated to permit government expenditures skyrocketing.
But by 1862, Abraham Lincoln needed to fund his invasion of the South. So once again, the government began to print up paper money. The government's power to print unbacked paper notes would later become the pillar of the Federal Reserve System. After the Civil War, the nation's monetary system became sounder when the U.S. adopted a gold standard. For nearly 20 years, the total output of goods and services grew at an unprecedented rate of 4% per year. In the midst of this prosperity, the big industrialists and financiers were plotting to expand their empires with the help of government. With the passage of the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887, the large railroads succeeded in blocking their smaller competitors through regulation. By 1896, they were poised to do the same thing with the banks. Two camps emerged as leaders in this economic war. They were led by J.P. Morgan, the world's most powerful private banker, and John D. Rockefeller, the oil tycoon. Morgan and Rockefeller were great adversaries, but despite their business differences, they both favored a central bank. They wanted cheap credit and an inflated money supply to finance the expansion of their empires. Together, they led the campaign to sell the idea to the American public, which later led to the founding of the Federal Reserve.